The first suitcase bobbed in the gray morning like forgotten luggage, but inside were human legs. By the time the third bag washed ashore, a name that had been private, familiar, and smiling in family photos was blasted across the headlines: Melanie McGuire. A nurse, a mother, a wife, an accused now convicted of dismembering the man who had shared her bed, her home, and her children. How does a marriage go from home-cooked dinners to suitcases on the bay? Please help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. This is Behind Closed Doors, the unraveling of the McGuire marriage and the trail of ordinary domestic details that led prosecutors to a verdict of murder. William Bill McGuire was, by many accounts, a quiet man with the steady rhythms of working life and family, a Navy veteran, a father, a husband. He and Melanie raised 2 sons together in suburban New Jersey. Melanie Lynn McGuire worked as a nurse in a fertility clinic, respected, professional, someone who wore the same calm smile around coworkers as she did in family snapshots. But underneath that tidy domestic life, other threads were fraying. Prosecutors later described a secret life, long texts, whispered meetings at work, and an affair with a colleague, a doctor at the clinic. In the years after, the alleged affair would become the orchestra conductor for motive theory, a desire to start a new life with a new partner, leaving the old one behind. Descriptions of the marriage from friends and neighbors paint a complex picture. Moments of normalcy and tenderness, documented strains, arguments, money troubles, and allegations that would surface later in court. But nothing in those domestic pictures could prepare the public for what would be found washed up along the Chesapeake Bay in early May of 2004. It began, at least to the rest of the world, with a fisherman. On May 5, 2004, a large dark green suitcase was seen floating in the water near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel. When it was opened, the objects inside were not luggage, clothes, or holiday souvenirs. They were human legs. Over the next 11 days, 2 more suitcases were found. A second bag yielded a torso and head. The third produced arms. Together, the pieces told a horror story that was clinical and intimate dismemberment, a medical towel, precise cuts, evidence that the person who did this had knowledge and control. The head bore a single bullet wound. The torso held 2 more. A pathologist would later testify about the location of wounds, the telltale signs on bone and tissue. The wounds, the method of separation at joints, and the clean way the remains were packaged suggested a person who knew how to handle human anatomy. When authorities released a facial reconstruction, an acquaintance, someone who had known Bill, recognized the likeness. The name moved from anonymous reconstruction into the real world. William Bill McGuire. An investigation that would span months and gather evidence from ordinary objects began to unfold. Plastic bags, fibers, toll records, and a set of matching suitcases. Investigators were methodical, tracing purchases, examining fibers under microscopes, and comparing items found with photos of the McGuire home. The suitcases were a key thread. Dark green, part of a 3-piece Kenneth Cole set, the same kind the McGuires owned. That piece of commonality is easily waved off in the abstract. Luggage is sold everywhere, but when paired with a web of smaller links, the suitcases began to look like a neighborhood breadcrumb trail. Witnesses, purchase records, and forensic testing tied the luggage not just to the victim, but to the household that had once owned the same pattern. In the digital age, small things leave big tracks. 2 days after Bill disappeared, Melanie's E-ZPass was recorded passing through a Delaware toll booth. The charge? 90 cents. A tiny fee, but investigators saw it as a breadcrumb in time and place. In the weeks that followed, prosecutors would use that 90-cent toll to show proximity and movement inconsistent with Melanie's stated timeline. Complicating matters further, Melanie contacted E-ZPass to have the record removed. A separate attempt was later made by an unidentified man. Those actions, investigators argued, were not the innocent forgetfulness of a commuter, but the awkward fumblings of someone trying to tidy an inconvenient digital trace. On one bullet lodged in Bill's chest, forensic analysts found green polyester fibers, the kind used in household furniture. The McGuires owned a green couch, a medical-grade towel discovered with the torso-matched towels from the fertility clinic where Melanie worked. Plastic bags used to wrap parts of the body were traced back to the same manufacturing run as bags containing Bill's clothes, clothes Melanie had said she had given away. None of these items alone proved guilt. Alone, they might be coincidence. Together, they created a lattice of circumstantial evidence that, for prosecutors, formed a coherent picture: location, materials, and opportunity. Perhaps the most human piece of the puzzle was the alleged affair with Dr. Bradley Miller, a romantic thread that prosecutors argued supplied motive. Witnesses testified about flirtations, late-night conversations, and plans to start a life together. Miller, called to testify, described a relationship that prosecutors said gave Melanie a reason to abandon her marriage. Melanie, for her part, would later say the relationship did not mean she wanted to kill her husband. She maintained her innocence, sometimes pointing to alternative theories, such as Bill's alleged gambling debt. But in court, motive is rarely singular. It is an emotional frame for a jury to understand why someone might cross a line. As the forensic lattice tightened, so did the narrative of a woman who, according to the prosecution, orchestrated the killing and then performed the gruesome task of concealing it, packing body parts into suitcases and sending them out to sea. Investigators presented surveillance, financial records, and witness testimony, each piece a small, clinical instrument chipping away at the gaps in the story. Melanie McGuire's trial began in March 2007 in Middlesex County. The prosecution assembled a case built on what they called persuasive circumstantial evidence: the E-ZPass entry, the matching luggage, the fibers, the towels, the timing of purchases, and the testimony of those who knew of an affair and perceived motive. Defense attorneys pushed back, arguing reasonable doubt, pointing to alternative explanations, and highlighting the absence of some forms of direct, incontrovertible evidence. They presented witnesses, probed the reliability of informants, and painted a more ambiguous portrait: marital strain, gambling debt, and shadowy claims of mob involvement that would later be discredited. In the mind of the jurors, the question was not whether dark details existed. They did, but whether those details together could point to only one conclusion: that Melanie McGuire had killed her husband and disposed of his body. On April 23, 2007, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, desecration of human remains, possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, and perjury in relation to the case. Other charges, including counts tied to anonymous communications, resulted in acquittals. The conviction sent a ripple through a community that had once known the McGuires as a typical suburban family. Judge sentencing followed in July. The court imposed a life sentence with requirements that, under state law, would mean decades before any possibility of parole. The appellate courts would later review the trial and the sentence, but ultimately affirmed the verdict and the punishment. In the years since, there have been additional legal maneuvers, appeals, motions alleging ineffective assistance of counsel, and even a jailhouse informant story that briefly suggested a different narrative involving Atlantic City mobsters. Investigators and prosecutors scrutinized those claims and found them lacking. Courts rejected requests for new trials once those alternate theories were discredited. Melanie McGuire remains incarcerated. She has continued to proclaim her innocence in interviews and legal filings, an insistence that keeps the case alive in public imagination, fueling new podcast episodes, documentaries, and debates about the strength of circumstantial evidence. Behind closed doors, human lives are woven from the ordinary. Small rituals, shared breakfast tables, the silent rhythms of work and school and sleep. When those ordinary threads are suddenly severed, the aftermath is both public spectacle and private devastation. Bill McGuire's family lost a husband and a father. Melanie McGuire lost a life that previously had looked ordinary to the outside world. The jurors made a decision based on a lattice of evidence, small facts, quietly amassed, building to something that convinced a court beyond a reasonable doubt. Is justice the slamming of a gavel or the slow, exacting work of science that points to a single explanation? Or is justice something less tidy, a reflection, in part, of the stories we are willing to accept and the doubts we choose to silence? In the McGuire story, we're left with ordinary objects that became evidentiary threads. A couch with green fibers, a 90-cent toll, towels from a clinic, a set of matching suitcases. Small things, human things. And together, in the hands of skilled investigators and prosecutors, they became the scaffolding for a conviction. Behind closed doors, people conceal their true faces. Sometimes the masks slip. Sometimes they are forced off by the tide. This story of love, secrecy, and a life that ended in suitcases on the bay is a reminder that the ordinary can hide the unimaginable. For the families, the jury, and for anyone who looks at a photograph of a smiling couple now clipped into 1,000 articles, the question remains: what happens next when the doors are opened?